Jingle bells, jingle bells, jingle all the way. I can't wait for Christmas time, so I can roll you in the hay. Easy come, easy go, have a good time with lots of dough. Slipping up high, slipping down low, love 'em and leave 'em all with the show, yeah. I like female form in a minimum dress, money to spend with a capital S. Get a date with a woman in red, one holy night with 3 in bed. He got it, and I want it. They got it, and I can't have it. But I want it, but it don't matter. She got it, and I can't get it. I want a mistress for Christmas. I want a mistress for Christmas. I want a mistress for Christmas. Easy come, easy go, slipping high, slipping low, yeah. He got it, and I want it. They got it, and I can't have it. And I want it, but it don't matter. She got it, and I can't get it. He got it, and I want it. They got it, and I can't have it. But I want it, it don't matter. She got it, and I can't get a mistress for Christmas. You know what I'm talking about, yeah. A mistress for Christmas. You gotta send me down, send me down. A mistress for Christmas. I want a woman in red with a bow in my bed. A mistress for Christmas. I slide down that North Pole, baby. I wanna ride on your reindeer, honey. And bring them mistress for Christmas.
Woo, baby. You know, I don't know that I need, but I certainly want you to have, a little mistress for Christmas, baby. It is time for Sovryn Tech. About the closest thing you're going to get to that. Boy, I love that song. Of course, it's a cover from the original AC/DC song being performed by Hailstorm, which can you beat? I can't get enough of that. Lizzie Hale, of course, the amazing, the beautiful Lizzie Hale, performing Mistress for Christmas to other women. Can you get enough of that? I know I sure as hell can't. But anyway, the Golden Stallion, the Man of Tomorrow, Savzu, the Rated R radio star, here for you for a little, not really, I don't want to say Christmas edition. Of course, that's kind of that ugly C word, right? And if you listened to Sex and Science Hour last night, you know all about that, baby. No, this is Saturnalia, though technically it's Calenda. That's Kalenda. It's not really Saturnalia. Saturnalia ends on the winter solstice, but maybe I'll save that little story for later on in the episode if you want to know the history behind all of that, which is always fun to talk about. But why waste time? Let's talk about what is exactly happening in the tech and science news this week. And I'll tell you, I got a couple things, open it up with the foreplay, of course, is what we call the, it used to be called the random access. Now a great listener came up with the idea of the foreplay. Woo! Because, of course, the show ends with a climax and got a hell of a climax for this episode. We got some stories where we're going to update some of the things maybe that we talked about last week that maybe I was wrong about. And hey, this is one case where I said last week that I'd be happy if I was wrong. And this is, kind of this opening case here is, well, one of them I'm wrong about, the other I'm actually right about. So, well, whatever, we'll get into it. Why don't we open it right up with a little update on smartwatches. Now, we talked last week, in fact, last week's episode 204, which was, I believe I named it Smartwatches in a Dumb Society, which granted that, I totally stand by that title. The idea was, or what I had discussed last week was that really it seemed like the entire smartwatch category was getting abandoned by pretty much every company, you could think of. A lot of this, a lot of my theories and the statements I was making was based upon the fact that Apple is not being forthcoming at all with their actual sales. In fact, they're using a lot of verbal trickery, as it were, to make the Apple Watch sound like it's actually doing business, when at the end of the day, not so much. It's certainly not meeting expectations anyway. Though yes, obviously people would, any company would probably be happy to sell the amount of things, or the amount of SKUs that Apple is with the Apple Watch. But regardless, then we had Moto 360, or, the Moto 360, which was not going to be getting an update. And, I talked about the fact that, hey, maybe what this is all about is that these companies don't see a reason to update their watches year by year, that maybe they want to go with a 2, a 3, a 4-year cycle, or maybe even longer, which there's no way that they're doing longer. But regardless, maybe that's what they had in mind. And if that was the case, I was like, well, that's great. Then that's what they're doing. But and it wasn't a hard prediction on my part, and I made sure to make that super, super clear. But my prediction is that there's a real potential that, like, Google was planning on coming out with a couple smartwatches, particularly Angelfish and Swordfish. Angelfish being the more interesting and more powerful of the two. Now, all the news on that front had become very, very quiet. It went quiet, and it was like, with what was going on with Motorola and, Apple Watch sales and all this, it's like, well, maybe this is a category that just, kind of missed the boat. And now, as soon as I say that, in the following days, I had some listeners send me some interesting stories that came a couple days later. And then also, Google announced that they had bought Chronologics, which is a company that was actually started by a couple of ex-Googlers, even though I don't think anybody is ever really an ex-Googler. And honestly, the fact that Chronologics got bought out, it kind of proves the point, doesn't it? But Chronologics is a company that had built their own smartwatch OS. It is not Android Wear. And so, why exactly would Google, acquire Chronologics? Well, maybe because they are having some troubles with Android Wear, and they wanted to get their hands on some interesting properties, that being APIs and an entire OS perhaps that they could integrate into Android Wear. But also they announced that, yes, they will be releasing in Q1 of 2017. They will be releasing, we don't know the names of them, but they will be releasing Angelfish and Swordfish, those two watches that we knew about months ago that, for all intents and purposes, really should have been out during the 10.4 event this past October 2016, but it didn't happen. Believe me, I'm happy about this. And in fact, there's a little more details, which is that Google isn't actually going to, they're not going to be branded as Google products. So these are not going to be Pixel smartwatches. Maybe, I could speculate and say, well, maybe they're not calling them Pixel watches because, they didn't release it during the 10.4 event and they didn't want to confuse people. I don't know exactly how that works. And certainly, as much as I don't want to believe it, it does appear that there are a lot of people out there really that stupid, that can't pick up on very subtle, so shall we say, marketing cues, or, they can't understand well, whatever. I'm not going to go down that road. But I guess that, you do seem to have to be extra cautious in the whole marketing realm today, even in the tech world, which I would hope would be quite the opposite, but it's not. So yeah, these will be whoever is making it, and they have not announced who's actually making it. You don't know if it's LG, though LG is the only one. See, this is the important thing to understand, is the Angelfish watch, and that's the one that I was the most intrigued by. This is the bigger brother of the two, between Angelfish and Swordfish. Angelfish is supposed to have where it is a standalone device. And in fact, that got reiterated in the announcement about these two watches coming out in Q1 2017. Is that, this will be a standalone, this could effectively be a quote unquote standalone watch, which is what I wanted. That's what I said is really needed. You have to be able to make the watch its own device. It cannot be tethered to a smartphone for it to be a viable product that people are actually going to want. Otherwise, it's just an accessory. And clearly, other than maybe, an OtterBox case, most people don't accessorize their phones. They just don't. I'm glad that this is happening, and I'm glad that it's this direction. And LG, it could be a few different companies that are actually releasing it. LG would be the one that has the most experience with having a watch that has built-in GPS, built-in SIM cards, built-in everything to where it could actually be not a phone replacement, but a competitor to the smartphone category. And that's the thing that you got to keep this in perspective, is that don't think, and I think a lot of people do, don't think that the smartwatch has to actually replace the smartphone. Okay? Just like you can have DVD and Blu-ray running at the same time, or you can have a bunch of different concurrent technologies that sort of do the same thing, but whatever, they meet different niches, for whatever reasons those are. That could be the case with the smartwatch and the smartphone. Some people like smartwatches, some people like smartphones. Personally, I'm excited for the smartwatch. I can't wait for it to happen. And so I'm glad this is one of those cases where I am so glad that I am wrong, and I am wrong on two accounts, in that the smartwatch will definitely, this will be a standalone product as far as we can tell. And then also the fact that, it's going to be a reality, and they're going to do it. So excited about that. Again, couldn't be more glad to be wrong. And I said that last week too, that please let me be wrong about this, because I want this to be a thing. For so many reasons. So that's on the horizon. Like I said, they did buy Chronologics. I think there was another company that they bought out too that is also in the smartwatch business. So it looks like Google's taking it very seriously. And I think it's a great direction for them to go in, because, not that I like Google, but just as, just looking at it from a business perspective, because they're smartphones that they themselves are making, even though, again, these smartwatches won't be branded as Google products. These smartphones that they're making are just like these really premium products, very, very high. We're talking base price, $600? So if you could come out with smartwatches that perhaps do the $200 to $300 range or something like that, but then can give you, because this is what's going to be coming into Android Wear 2.0, right? Is you're going to have Google Assistant, and you're going to have, a lot of these, not that they're proprietary, but that they have a better integration with, say, the Pixel phones. If you build those into the watches, then you almost make the case for the accessory, right? Because Swordfish is going to be an accessory product. So I could see that. I could really, I can see kind of the idea here, to sell these things as sort of the lower end way to interact with Google's ecosystem. Again, I'm not saying that that's the right way to go. I'm definitely excited about, about the possibilities of just having a smartwatch and not needing a smartphone anymore. I'm certainly on board with that, as I said. Also, I do want to update, because I think I talked about Asteroid OS during that episode, and Asteroid OS is, I thought it was in beta, but apparently it's still very much an early alpha, and I think it's only working with LG watches right now. So my understanding, and maybe I just, missed something on the forums as far as what exactly, how far along they were. So it's not that far along, but again, this is still, even if nobody's dropping, or even if companies aren't dropping out of the smartwatch, category, which also apparently at CES, a bunch of companies are going to be announcing various Android Wear watches. Even if they're not really dropping out, which is what I was thinking was going to be happening, and I'm not the only one, a lot of, tech journalists were, if it becomes a viable category, Asteroid OS still wins. It's a win-win for Asteroid OS, which is this open source, Linux-based, like really Linux-based, not like Android, Linux-based, operating system for watches, because if the smartwatch becomes a viable category, people are going to want, an open alternative that they could take advantage of and that other companies could get on board with. Okay. And of course, a lot of this was also the issues with Pebbles, right? Not that Asteroid OS could run on a Pebble, as far as I know. But anyway, so, that'd be a win. But then if people dump the smartwatch category, well, there's a bunch of smartwatches out there that's going to need, a new operating system that can do something actually modern, say a year or 2 or 3 from now. So either way, really, Asteroid OS is a win. And so that's something you're going to want to keep an eye on, in my opinion, all the way around. So let's, while we're on the topic of Google, we've got a couple of Google stories, or should I say Alpha Goog? That's what I like to call it, because of course they're the big parent company, which is Alphabet. But never ever forget that Alphabet is really just, it's Google. Like, at the end of the day, no matter how they want to say that they're separate and that each one of them is doing a different thing, no, they're still all Google, and anything that Google does gets tied in with whatever other part of Alphabet does, whether it's, what's the one that begins with a C that they're trying to solve death, all, and as well as X and all these other companies, they're still, heavily working with each other. I don't think there's any doubt about that, or at least no doubt in my mind. I hope there's none in yours, and that's kind of the point of bringing a lot of this up. Now, they did start effectively a new company. Of course, again, it's not really a new company. It's just an offshoot of what Google was doing over the past decade, and that is their smart car company. Or their smart car business, or their driverless car business, and they're calling it Waymo. That's just WAYMO. Now, first things first. Again, this is nothing new. All this is just now it's a separate company that is going to be working on the driverless car technology. Okay. What the fuck is with these childish fucking names for all these companies out of everywhere in Silicon Valley? I don't get it. Like, one thing I love is the company that's making Zcash. It's like the Zcash Electric Company. Like, it's this really long name. Sounds like something out of an Ayn Rand novel. And I just think it's brilliant. What happened to that sort of thing? What happened to great names like Zenith? Just everything it just feels like it has a few too many vowels or lack of vowels. And it just sounds like kids play. Very annoying. Even the company being called Alphabet is downright childish. So I don't understand what is with the push on a lot of this stuff. And every company's doing, even Microsoft, like, oh, it's Microsoft Sway. And there's something strange there that I still need to think about, but I don't dig it. Anyway, so Waymo now apparently is going to be, of course, this is something we've known and we reported about previously on Sovryn Tech, is that Google is not actually going to build its own cars anymore. It is just going to be a partner. It's going to develop the technology, and then they'll work with partners to integrate it. They are working, it was announced with the Waymo announcement that they are working with Honda, but as far as we know, it's not about Honda's being like the official Google car or anything. But it's going to be that there's a degree of a research partnership of sorts, because Honda has been working on LiDAR technology for driverless cars and, all this different stuff. So don't expect, a Honda to be the first Waymo car. I'm never, ever going to like saying that. Waymo. But regardless, you're going to, well, we'll see what happens. We'll see who they end up working with, overall on this. Maybe it will never take off. There are certainly problems. Of course, there was that issue in San Francisco of a driverless car going through a red light this past week, and people are really up in arms around that. And, I get it. It's important. I'll mention this. Yes, it's true that we are really, with any new technology, you're definitely dealing with a time where, how to put this, you have growing pains in any new category, right? And, things go wrong and you learn from that and you have to build onto it and you fix it going forward. But if you listen to this week's Patreon episode, or not just this week's, there was a ton of episodes that came out this week on the Sovryn Tech Patreon. But if you listen to this past week's Q&A, we talked about V2V technology, which is vehicle to vehicle, kind of like B2B is business to business. Well, V2V is in Victor to Victor. That's vehicle to vehicle. Now, this is going to be a mandate, a federal mandate in the United States that in 2 years, all cars have to have this ability for vehicles to talk to each other. Okay, now I did a much deeper breakdown in the Q&A episode. So if you're not a patron yet, become one. It's just $1 a month if you want to do more, and lots of people do, and a lot of people eventually, after a month or two, they up their donation amount because, you know, they appreciate the value that's being brought to them, and I appreciate the value they give me. You know, get on that because you're going to want to hear about the further breakdown. But, you know, with this V2V technology, you know, coming out, I mean, this is going to be a huge boon for a lot of these driverless cars and all this. But I mean, the bottom line being with any of this is that for V2V, for driverless cars to work, I say this all the time, but it's because it's true. And you have to remember this, is that none of this stuff works. Be it V2V, where cars can communicate with each other and let each other know when one's broken down, and that way it can react. And, oh, does that mean you're going to lose control of your car even if it still has a steering wheel? But with V2V, with driverless cars, every car has to have the technology for it to actually work. In fact, that issue with the car in San Francisco, you know, the driverless car going through the red light, probably wouldn't have happened if every car was driverless, right? Or it had this V2V thing, because they could communicate. But then what are the issues with every car suddenly having the ability to communicate every single goddamn thing that you are doing with your car, in your car, where your car is going, blah, 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 or you not having the ability to, say, drive a classic car if you want to, or not being able to, you know, you really can't take the wheel. Though, I mean, you know, these are big questions to ask. Is that okay? You know, especially when we live within the status matrix. I mean, come on. So huge issues to, you know, really to consider there, no doubt about it. And also Waymo, the other announcement they made with Waymo is that, and this is kind of interesting, is that federal law, while we're talking about federal laws, is saying that they have to have a steering wheel in the car. So even Google's dream of there being no steering wheel isn't going to happen. Like, you know, they're going to have steering wheels. So the driverless car future, if it's even to be a thing, like it might never, and maybe this is a good thing because government regulation's fucking it up, right? Because maybe it'll never actually, you know, come to fruition because there's so many regulations that are going to keep holding it back, you know, from it reaching perhaps its full potential. Again, not that I want it. I'm not interested in that. I want to drive my car. Okay. But you won't have that ability. You know, the issue you're going to have is that you're still going to have steering wheels. You're still going to have all these kind of legacy systems in it. And so they can't actually, you know, blossom into what, you know, people dream about having with driverless cars. So maybe it'll never become a category. And hey, good. I am so on board with the fact that driverless cars never become a thing. You know, please, I couldn't be more excited about that. So anyway, just an interesting bit of news. And, you know, speaking of something never coming to fruition, boy, let's get right into the next bit during the foreplay here. Magic Leap. Oh man. Was it the Intercept? I think had a whole story that talked about, and maybe if I think of it, I'll get the link in the show notes, had a whole story. I shared it already on various social media about how Magic Leap isn't happening. Like they are so far behind, and they admitted that really cool video that everybody watched and was so excited about, that when I saw it, when the Golden Stallion saw it, I said, that's bullshit. There's no way that that's real. That is not happening. You know, they do not have a technology like that. And guess what? I was right. Okay, so might have been a little off about smartwatches, but I was dead on about Magic Leap. Is that, I mean, this is effectively the new Theranos. It doesn't exist. They're having all kinds of issues with the technology they're trying to do. And they admitted that video, like I was saying, that video that they made that everybody got all hot and bothered about, and they're like, ooh, yeah, ooh, I can't wait for this. This is going to be the real technology. Yeah, Google's going to save the day again, which of course Google doesn't. Okay, but you know, that they said was, I think it was devised by Weta. The, you know, Weta Workshop, that's the company that, you know, that made like Lord of the Rings and all that stuff. So it was all special effects. It wasn't real at all. And I don't know what the fuck, you know, Kevin Kelly saw when he went down there to talk about it for Wired Magazine. I mean, what were they showing to him? You know, and now the reports coming out are that that they're kind of pivoting, and they're effectively making, you know, they're making like a HoloLens you know, thing, which, I mean, HoloLens already exists. So I don't get it. You know, you got it until this is a lesson that's going to become more and more important going forward. And a lot of tech journalists, hopefully they start to learn it, because they're the people disseminating a lot of this information to everybody else, is that, look, until the product's fucking done, just don't even bother talking about it. You know, unless you're just trying to tell people, hey, you know, they're trying to build this hype, but it's all hype and it's not real. Because that's the reality here, is that Magic Leap is seemingly nothing. I mean, and it's so far behind from anywhere that it needs to be. And I know a lot of people that are like, well, I'm not going to get into VR until Magic Leap comes around. I'll just wait for Magic Leap. Well, fine. You stay out of the revolution then. You stay out of the, what's happening in VR, because you're going to be waiting 10 more years. As to where everybody else is probably going to be making a shit ton of money and having a shit ton of fun, as they get into this new category with VR and, mixed reality and all the rest. So stay in the past if you want to be with, because that's where Google lives largely, other than, fortunately they're coming out with a smartwatch. But I'm intrigued by the fact that they're not wanting to put their name on it. I almost feel like they want somebody to kind of test bed it, and they don't want their company history in any way to necessarily be attached. I don't know. That's a weird situation. So anyway, let's move on to another little bit of foreplay. I got a ton of, this week was, and you'd think it's like a holiday week, right? That it wouldn't be such a big deal. Oh, no. There's plenty of tech news to go around. So, and this is a pretty interesting little story here. And what it is, it's a website that I want you to check out. And it's the URL is NeverAgain.tech. And I was really pleased to see this. Now, you go and you look at the website. There's not much to see. It's not going to, nothing to get all excited about necessarily as far as looks, but what it's about, and I like the minimalism of the site, really. What it's about, I really appreciate. And it starts off, I'll tell you what it's about in just a second, though you could probably guess from the name, NeverAgain.tech. But here, I'll read this, let's see, from Sarah Kinzior. Write a list of things you would never do because it is possible that in the next year, you will do them. And that's a hell of a quote, frankly. I'm impressed. So, but what this is, it is a site that has a collection and a statement of purpose of signees from a multitude of tech companies, from Alphabet to, or various parts of Alphabet to Microsoft, all kinds of different companies, where they are saying, look, if, the coming administration of the United States, that being the president, the executive administration, if the government wants to create lists based upon race, religion, and other factors, okay, and they want to collect data upon these people to, help them create a list, that they will do whatever they can within their companies, or they will leave their companies, their respective companies, to not allow that to happen. Awesome. It is so good to see people have that, just be aware, have that consciousness, and be willing to take actions around the fact that they are just not going to, here, I'll read the pledge here on this site. We, the undersigned, are employees of tech organizations and companies based in the United States. We are engineers, designers, business executives, and others whose jobs include managing or processing data about people. We are choosing to stand in solidarity with Muslim Americans, immigrants, and all people whose lives and livelihoods are threatened by the incoming administration's proposed data collection policies. We refuse to build a database of people based on their constitutionally protected religious beliefs. We refuse to facilitate mass deportations of people the government believes to be undesirable. We have educated ourselves on the history of threats like these and on the roles that technology and technologists played in carrying them out. Now, Stallion here, I'm going to stop right here because this next bit of business is beautiful, because I've talked about this for so long, and I know I hate to use a biblical reference, but fuck, it's Christmas. I was the voice in the wilderness, and I was telling you, I said, you don't understand when you build ID systems, when you collect all this data, how it can get used. I mentioned the Holocaust with Diamag, the IBM company that, effectively invented punch cards, and that's how they were able to round up the Jews. I talked about apartheid South Africa in the 70s and how Americans back then seemed to have a little more goddamn sense, because they were able to say, wait a second, no, you don't want to do ID systems in South Africa because it's going to allow for, very, very racist policies, and all kinds of terrible things to happen. And this site brings up both. I saw there was an email that actually the lovely hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy sent me, where people were talking about this very similar, situation with the upcoming administration. People are all concerned with Trump going in. Everybody's all concerned about their privacy and what happens with their data and all that. And they're afraid. Okay. Not that I want people living in fear, but I'm glad people are taking the necessity of these technologies very, very seriously. And they are. Okay. But in that email, it specifically brought up both cases that I mentioned about Diamag, okay, in Nazi Germany, and of course, apartheid South Africa, about what the ID systems did there. I'm not alone anymore. I don't have to say it anymore, because now everybody else will fucking raise the roof about it. Good. So let me read what it's just the rest of this pledge. We see how IBM collaborated to digitize and streamline the Holocaust, contributing to the deaths of 6 million Jews and millions of others. We recall the internment. Ooh, how about this? We recall the internment of Japanese Americans during the Second World War. We recognize that mass deportations precipitated the very atrocity the word genocide was created to describe, the murder of 1.5 million Armenians in Turkey. We acknowledge that genocides are not merely a relic of the distant past. Among others, Tutsi Rwandans and Bosnian Muslims have been victims in our lifetimes. Today, we stand together to say not on our watch and never again. We commit to the following actions, and there's an entire list of what they're going to do, and I think it's wonderful. I am so glad that people take this seriously. Smart people in some of the biggest industries, some of the biggest companies in the world today. Good. Because people need to speak up about this, and they need to make it aware. But let's broaden this up a bit. Let's be careful when we talk about ID, and a lot of these other things, just what it can eventually create when finally the threat of the gun is out there. Now, of course, the Trump administration, or, the soon-to-be Trump administration, has already started backpedaling, saying, oh, no, we're not going to make this kind of list, blah, 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 and whatever. But at the end of the day, I still like to see this sort of cultural pushback, because we clearly have, and we might get into this a little bit more in our main story, we clearly seem to have at least some aspects of our culture that are all about doing this, that it would be all for, deporting, perhaps even locking up or collecting data on certain people just based upon skin color, race, whatever else, religion, you name it. Anyway, just go to the website NeverAgain.tech if you want to see more about it. Right now, they're up to over 3,000 signatures. That's a lot of people in Silicon Valley. It really is. And I hope that keeps rising, and I'm just glad. The best part of this is to highlight the fact that this is, it's not conspiracy theory about what exactly has been done with, information on databases and what has been done with ID technologies overall throughout history, and that these things are also not a relic, like it said, not a relic of the ancient past. It has happened recently. I could talk about that forever, like the whole thing with the Bosnians. So I've worked with Bosnians. I've actually served in the military with some Bosnians. I've also, and in private industry, I worked with them as well. And, they're Muslims. And what's funny? Never wanted to kill anybody. And they honestly, they integrated, and I don't mean as in they dropped their culture. I just mean that they integrated very nicely in America when they came in the late 90s. You're not hearing any crazy stories about these people, what they've done, every day, like somehow they're doing bombings or who knows what. And nobody notices because they're white. And that's so fucked up. That like, oh yeah, no, you wouldn't even know, and you don't care. You only seem to care when suddenly their skin color is a little bit different. It's so crazy. I'm going to save more on that subject because I want to talk about it a bit more. We had a Sovryn Tech listener actually sent a great TED Talk video that I'm going to get into that I think has a lot of interesting things to say, and that is worthy of getting a full Sovryn Tech shakedown, as it were. So anyway, let's see what else we have here for the stories. This is an interesting one. We got 3 more. In fact, this is another update from, I guess it would have been last week, where I talked about CyanogenMod. The issue, or maybe it was the week before, where we were talking about how CyanogenMod, Cyanogen Inc., the company, is running into all kinds of problems, and that they are, stepping away from a lot of the things that they had been working on over the past few years, a lot of which I was excited about, where their goal, their stated mission, was to take Android away from Google. And I thought that was an awesome thing, but, that ends up not happening. And now we do know, and I talked about it briefly, I said, I think CyanogenMod, their plan right now is they know that they're getting the boot from Cyanogen, and that they're going to become a separate thing and have a different name. Well, now we know the name, and the name is Lineage. So it's going to be Lineage OS, and Cyanogen Inc. has already said that they are no longer putting out any more CyanogenMod nightlies. They're not doing anything of the sort. What everything's going to end up looking like under Lineage, I don't know, but it's effectively the same team, same community team and all that. They're just changing the name. So when I talk about CyanogenMod, and I'm going to have to update a lot of my Dark Android stuff, when I talk about CyanogenMod, that's not really a product anymore. We're talking about Lineage or Lineage OS. I really think they should go with Lineage OS just to make sure, or hell, call it Lineage Mod. I don't care. But don't just call it Lineage. That way people know what the hell you're talking about. Okay, so put mod or OS at the end of it, and this is something I'll be keeping an eye on. But if you are somebody that has been interested recently in setting stuff up for CyanogenMod, or setting up a CyanogenMod based device or whatever, this is what you're going to be looking for. It's all going to be under Lineage, and it should largely be the same bit of business. Unfortunately, they're not going to have perhaps some of the support and maybe some of the funding that would trickle down effectively from Cyanogen Inc. itself. But I think we'll end up doing just fine. And even if, if the end game is that they only have time to develop for a certain amount of devices instead of the more broad swath that was out there, which was all really done by a community, working for free anyway. That's okay, because, it really helps to hone down what devices, people want to work with. And not that I don't want there to be less choice out there, but it gives you the opportunity to work harder and maybe do better things when they can concentrate, on, less devices effectively. So I'll be, if something big happens with that, I will certainly be keeping, everybody posted about it. Now, another story that was very interesting we saw an almost instantaneous response, thankfully, as to what was happening there. But in Egypt, apparently, the app Signal, which is my most recommended messaging app, if you want to, how do I communicate securely outside of PGP? I still think PGP is the best way to go. If you just want to do it on your smartphone, really Signal is the absolute way to go. And in Egypt, supposedly, in fact, I got a little bit of a story here. I'm just going to read it for you from Engadget. Egypt has blocked its residents from accessing encrypted messaging app Signal, according to the application's developer. Madam Masser, an Egypt-based media organization, reported yesterday that several users took to Twitter over the weekend to report that they could no longer send or receive messages while they have Egyptian IP addresses. I guess the story wrote that funny. Open Whisper Systems, the team behind the app, told a user asking about a situation that everything was working just as intended on their end. Now that the company has confirmed that the country is blocking access to Edward Snowden's preferred messaging app, it has begun working on a way to circumvent the ban. They intend to deploy their solution over the next few weeks. This isn't the first time Egypt has restricted access to websites and apps. It shut down the internet and even texting and BlackBerry messaging in 2011, and it reportedly blocked access to VoIP services, Skype, Viber, and WhatsApp in 2015. Since it can take some time before Open Whisper Systems can issue a fix, it's advising anyone who wants to continue communicating through Signal in Egypt to use Tor or a VPN service. This is an important thing to keep in mind, is that, in any country, wherever certain IP addresses are coming from, that effectively Signal could get blocked. Now, this is one of those areas where, as I just mentioned, my number one choice for communication is always PGP. I recognize sort of the challenges that exist around that for varying reasons, even though they're getting less and less all the time. I mean, if you use Open Keychain on an Android device, you can set up PGP as easy as anything. It's really, really handy. But this is a concern. Now, you could say email can get controlled too. They can block certain ports, blah, 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 and then what the fuck are you going to do? Yada, yada, yada. But I guess what's important to learn about this is that there are, the potential exists to where even with the best apps in the world, you could lose the ability to communicate. Now, there's ways around that. Of course, yes, I agree, using a VPN, even though VPN technology can be suspect at times, or using Tor. I know there's some suspect around that, etc. Okay, but keep this in mind that can happen. But I applaud, Open Whisper Systems very quickly getting on board with, okay, we'll fix it. We'll make sure that, that Signal can get past all this stuff. I'm not exactly sure how they're going to do that, and they haven't talked about it. Maybe they're going to integrate, Tor somehow right into the app, or they're going to integrate some kind of VPN. I will, and the story didn't say this, and nobody's really mentioned it. Depending on how they're going to fix this issue, here's the big if for me, is that, are they going to be able to pull it off in iOS? That's the big if, is will whatever, however they decide to circumvent things, is that going to break some kind of terms of service with the App Store? So something to think about. I'll be keeping an eye on that. Again, when they announce how they're going to do it, maybe it'll end up being fine. But I wouldn't be surprised if whatever they come up with becomes an issue in the App Store. Because, understand, Apple will seemingly, for whatever reasons they want to make up, they will devise ways. They'll just not devise ways. They'll come up with something. If they don't like something, they'll come up with some reason to get rid of it. Kind of like how in the Jax, the very popular cryptocurrency wallet, in the Jax wallet, Apple has said, hey, we you can't put in Dash, you can't put in this crypto, you can't put in this crypto. And seemingly the only reason they don't like it is because it's so privacy focused. So maybe the same thing will happen then. And that could get interesting because, boy, how many people are going to dump iOS, honestly, if Signal doesn't work, based upon, the recent rise in use of Signal and over a lot of people's, some valid, some maybe a little overblown concerns over what, over the changing political landscape, even though maybe, well, I'm not going to go there. Okay, I can talk politics. There's very specific parts where maybe I want to talk politics on the show. Generally, I do not want to. So, okay, so let's see. We've got that. What other quick stories do we have here to bring up? Oh, this was interesting. This is nowhere near as important a story of any kind, but Facebook is now supposedly going to allow for live audio to where, you could, it's just like live video, but instead it's purely audio. And I'm intrigued by this. I don't like Facebook at all. I never recommend its use. But I am curious to see what exactly will come out of this. And I mean, it's just what it says, to where, you could do like a live podcast, with that. And then you'd have an interaction, like you'd kind of have a chat built in underneath, right? Because people could comment on it as they listen to it. I could see this being an interesting creative tool. I could imagine a lot of people wanting to use it. But it's going to be out there. Now, what's speaking of, and this dovetails nicely, speaking of the fact that iOS can really limit your possibilities, on Android, with the Facebook app on Android, you can listen to, say, something coming out through Facebook Live Audio, and you can listen to it in the background. You could hide the app, minimize the app. You don't really close it. And you could listen to, to the live audio that way. As to where on iOS, that won't be possible. So major advantage for Android there, as far as if people take advantage of Facebook Live Audio. I mean, yeah, it's going to be interesting. You could do, again, live podcasts right onto Facebook. Of course, what is this really about? This is about one more piece of what makes the internet, or the web particularly, so great, and building it into Facebook so you don't have to leave Facebook, right? It's like, oh yeah, you love podcasts? Well, guess what? You can have them right in Facebook. Now, people are already doing this, I know, with Facebook Live Audio, or Facebook Video, not Facebook Live Video. But they're doing it, I mean, yeah, they do it with Facebook Live Video too, but they do it with Facebook Video, to where they would make a video out of their podcast and then they would upload it. Just the video, and then people could play it and whatever. But this is going to kind of take that to the next level, especially with a mobile phone, to where you could have it playing in the background the entire time. It's not clear whether or not you could do that with the mobile site. It seems to be only with the Android Facebook app that you could play it in the background, or play it while you're surfing the rest of, surfing, perusing, going down the mind-numbing endlessness of, your Facebook timeline or newsfeed. So there you have that. That's it for the foreplay. I want to get into our main story. Now, in case you didn't already notice, all right, I am on location using a significantly better mic than I normally do when I'm on location. The lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy is loaning me her Neumann mic. I mean, this is just a high-end piece of equipment.
Sexy.
And of course, you can hear the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy right over there. Yes. Anyway, so I am on location, so not doing the segments and all of that. We're getting right into, we'll just go segment to segment, and no real breaks other than, just bringing up, of course, Sovryn Tech's amazing sponsors. And of course, we thank all of them. But what we have here is a TED Talk, and this is sent in by a Sovryn Tech listener, and I appreciate it. And the TED Talk is by Juan Enriquez. And this is one of the real TED Talks, not one of the TEDx ones. Not that I'm knocking anybody that gets those. But it's What Will Humans Look Like in 100 Years? So we'll get right to it. It's about 12, 13 minutes. And then I have a lot to say about it, but I think it's so interesting. It's a worthy listen, and you might not expect necessarily what it's about. And I certainly didn't expect its end game solution of what it was trying to bring up. So here we go. Juan Enrique's "What Will Humans Look Like in 100 Years?"
This TED Talk features futurist Juan Enriquez, recorded at TED Summit 2016.
Here's the question that matters, right? Because we're beginning to get all the tools together to evolve ourselves. And we can evolve bacteria, and we can evolve plants, and we can evolve animals. And we're now reaching the point where we really have to ask, is it really ethical, and do we want to evolve human beings? And as you're thinking about that, let me talk about that in the context of prosthetics. Prosthetics past, present, future. So this is the iron hand that belonged to one of the German counts, loved to fight, lost his arm in one of these battles. No problem, he just made a suit of armor, put it on, perfect prosthetic. That's where the concept of ruling with an iron fist comes from. And of course, these prosthetics have been getting more and more useful, more and more modern. You can hold soft-boiled eggs. You can have all types of controls. And as you're thinking about that, there are wonderful people like Hugh Hare who've been building absolutely extraordinary prosthetics. So the wonderful Amy Mullins will go out and say, how tall do I want to be tonight? Or he'll say, what type of cliff do I want to climb? Or does somebody want to run a marathon, or does somebody want a ballroom dance? And as you adapt these things, the interesting thing about prosthetics is they've been coming inside the body. So these external prosthetics have now become artificial knees, they've become artificial hips, and then they've evolved further to become not just nice to have, but essential to have. So when you're talking about a heart pacemaker as a prosthetic, you're talking about something that isn't just, I'm missing my leg, it's if I don't have this, I can die. And at that point, a prosthetic becomes a symbiotic relationship with the human body. And four of the smartest people that I've ever met, Ed Boyden, Hugh Hare, Joe Jacobson, Bob Lander, are working on a Center for Extreme Bionics. And the interesting thing, what you're seeing here is these prosthetics now get integrated into the bone, they get integrated into the skin, they get integrated into the muscle. And one of the other sides of Ed is he's been thinking about how to connect the brain using light or other mechanisms directly to things like these prosthetics. And if you can do that, then you can begin changing fundamental aspects of humanity. So how quickly you react to something depends on the diameter of a nerve. And of course, if you have nerves that are external or prosthetic, say with light or liquid metal, then you can increase that diameter, and you could even increase it theoretically to the point where, as long as you could see the muzzle flash, you could step out of the way of a bullet. Those are the order of magnitude of changes you're talking about. This is a fourth sort of level of prosthetics. These are phonak hearing aids. And the reason why these are so interesting is because they cross a threshold from where prosthetics are something for somebody who is disabled, and they become something that somebody who is quote-unquote normal might want to actually have. Because what this prosthetic does, which is really interesting, is not only does it help you hear, you can focus your hearing, so you can hear the conversation going on over there. You can have super hearing, you can have hearing in 360 degrees, you can have white noise, you can record, and oh, by the way, they also put a phone into this. So this functions as your hearing aid and also as your phone. And at that point, somebody might actually want to have a prosthetic voluntarily. All these thousands of loosely connected little pieces are coming together, and it's about time we ask the question, how do we want to evolve human beings over the next century or two? And for that, we turn to a great philosopher who was a very smart man despite being a Yankee fan. And Yogi Berra used to say, of course, that it's very tough to make predictions, especially about the future. So instead of making a prediction about the future to begin with, let's take what's happening in the present with people like Tony Atala, who is redesigning 30-some-odd organs. And maybe the ultimate prosthetic isn't having something external titanium. Maybe the ultimate prosthetic is take your own gene code, remake your own body parts. Because that's a whole lot more effective than any kind of a prosthetic. But while you're at it, then you can take the work of Craig Venter and Ham Smith, and one of the things that we've been doing is trying to figure out how to reprogram cells. And if you can reprogram a cell, then you can change the cells in those organs. So if you can change the cells in those organs, maybe you make those organs more radiation resistant, maybe you make them absorb more oxygen, maybe you make them more efficient to filter out stuff that you don't want in your body. And over the last few weeks, George Church has been in the news a lot because he's been talking about taking one of these programmable cells and inserting an entire human genome into that cell. And once you can insert an entire human genome into a cell, then you begin to ask the question, would you want to enhance any of that genome? Do you want to enhance a human body? How would you want to enhance a human body? Where is it ethical to enhance a human body, and where is it not ethical to enhance a human body? And all of a sudden what we're doing is we've got this multidimensional chessboard where we can change the human genetics by using viruses to attack things like AIDS. Or we can change the gene code through gene therapy to do away with some of the hereditary diseases. Or we can change the environment and change the expression of those genes in the epigenome and pass that on to the next generations. And all of a sudden, it's not just one little bit. It's all these stacked little bits that allow you to take little portions of it until all the portions coming together leads you to something that's very different. And a lot of people are very scared by this stuff. And it does sound scary. And there are risks to this stuff. So why in the world would you ever want to do this stuff? Why would we really want to alter the human body in a fundamental way? The answer lies in part with Lord Rees, Astronomer Royal of Great Britain. And one of his favorite sayings is the universe is 100% malevolent. So what does that mean? It means if you take any one of your bodies at random, drop it anywhere in the universe, drop it in space, you die. Drop it on the sun, you die. Drop it on the surface of Mercury, you die. Drop it near a supernova, you die. But fortunately, it's only about 80% effective. So as a great physicist once said, there's these little upstream eddies of biology that create order in this rapid torrent of entropy. So as the universe dissipates energy, there's these upstream eddies that create biological order. Now, the problem with eddies is they tend to disappear. They shift. They move in rivers. And because of that, when an eddy shifts, when the Earth becomes a snowball, when the Earth becomes very hot, when the Earth gets hit by an asteroid, when you have supervolcanoes, when you've got solar flares, when you have potentially extinction-level events like the next election, then all of a sudden, you can have periodic extinctions. And by the way, that's happened 5 times on Earth, and therefore it is very likely that the human species on Earth is going to go extinct someday. Not next week, not next month, maybe in November, but maybe 10,000 years after that. As you're thinking of the consequence of that, if you believe that extinctions are common and natural and normal and occur periodically, it becomes a moral imperative to diversify our species. And it becomes a moral imperative because it's going to be really hard to live on Mars if we don't fundamentally modify the human body. Right? You go from one cell, mom and dad coming together to make one cell, in a cascade to 10 trillion cells. We don't know if you change the gravity substantially if the same thing will happen to create your body. We do know that if you expose our bodies, as they currently are, to a lot of radiation, we will die. So as you're thinking of that, you have to really redesign things just to get to Mars. Forget about the moons of Neptune or Jupiter. And to borrow from Karl Kardashev, let's think about life in a series of scales. So a life 1 civilization is a civilization that begins to alter his or her looks. And we've been doing that for thousands of years. You know, you've got tummy tucks, and you've got this, and you've got that. You alter, your looks, and I'm told that not all of those alterations take place for medical reasons. Seems odd. A Life 2 civilization is a different civilization. A Life 2 civilization alters fundamental aspects of the body. So you put human growth hormone in, the person grows taller, or you put X in and the person gets fatter or loses metabolism or does a whole series of things, but you're altering the functions in a fundamental way. To become an intrasolar civilization, we're going to have to create a life-3 civilization. And that looks very different from what we've got here. Maybe you splice in Deinococcus radiodurans so that the cells can resplice after a lot of exposure to radiation. Maybe you breathe by having oxygen flow through your blood instead of through your lungs. But you're talking about really radical redesigns. And one of the interesting things that's happened in the last decade is we've discovered a whole lot of planets out there. And some of them may be Earth-like. The problem is, if we ever want to get to these planets, the fastest human objects, Juno and Voyager and the rest of the stuff, take tens of thousands of years to get from here to the nearest solar system. So if you want to start exploring beaches somewhere else, or you want to see 2 sun sunsets, then you're talking about something that is very different because you have to change the time scale and the body of humans in ways which may be absolutely unrecognizable. And that's a life-4 civilization. Now, we can't even begin to imagine what that might look like, but we're beginning to get glimpses of instruments that might take us even that far. And let me give you 2 examples. So this is the wonderful Floyd Romsberg. And one of the things that Floyd's been doing is he's been playing with the basic chemistry of life. So all life on this planet is made in ATCGs, the 4 letters of DNA. All bacteria, all plants, all animals, all humans, all cows, everything else. And what Floyd did is he changed out 2 of those base pairs, so it's ATXY. And that means that you now have a parallel system to make life, to make babies, to reproduce, to evolve, that doesn't mate with most things on Earth, or in fact, maybe with nothing on Earth. Maybe you make plants that are immune to all bacteria, maybe you make plants that are immune to all viruses. But why is that so interesting? It means that we are not a unique solution. It means you can create alternate chemistries to us that could be chemistries adaptable to a very different planet that could create life and heredity. The second experiment, or the other implication of this experiment, is that all life is based on 20 amino acids. If you don't substitute 2 amino acids, if you don't say ATXY, if you say ATCG plus XY, then you go from 20 building blocks to 172. And all of a sudden you've got 172 building blocks of amino acids to build life forms in very different shapes. Second experiment to think about is a really weird experiment that's been taking place in China. So this guy has been transplanting hundreds of mouse heads, right? And why is that an interesting experiment? Well, think of the first heart transplants. One of the things they used to do is they used to bring in the wife or the daughter of the donor, so the donee could tell the doctors, do you recognize this person? Do you love this person? Do you feel anything for this person? We laugh about that today. We laugh because we know the heart is a muscle, but for hundreds of thousands of years, or tens of thousands of years, I gave her my heart, she took my heart, she broke my heart. We thought this was emotion. And we thought maybe emotions are transplanted with the heart. Nope. So how about the brain? 2 possible outcomes to this experiment. If you can get a mouse that is functional, then you can see, is the new brain a blank slate? And boy, does that have implications. Second option, the new mouse recognizes Minnie Mouse. The new mouse remembers what it's afraid of, remembers how to navigate the maze, and if that is true, then you can transplant memory and consciousness. And then the really interesting question is, if you can transplant this, is the only input-output mechanism this down here? Or could you transplant that consciousness into something that would be very different, that would last in space, that would last tens of thousands of years, that would be a completely redesigned body that could hold consciousness for a long, long period of time? And let's come back to the first question. Why would you ever want to do that? Well, I'll tell you why. Because this is the ultimate selfie. This is taken from 6 billion miles away, and that's Earth. And that's all of us. And if that little thing goes, all of humanity goes. And the reason why you want to alter the human body is because you eventually want a picture that says, that's us, and that's us, and that's us, because that's the way humanity survives long-term extinction. And that's the reason why it turns out it's actually unethical not to evolve the human body, even though it can be scary, even though it can be challenging. But it's what's going to allow us to explore, live, and get to places we can't even dream of today, but which our great-great-great-great-grandchildren might someday. Thank you very much.
So, interesting talk. I mean, like really, really fucking interesting. A lot of points of consideration that I never really thought about. And in fact, kind of the main thrust of his talk is, yeah, like I never even considered it, that perhaps genetically engineering humanity, changing up humans at the DNA level, kind of like how I talked about how they changed the base pairs of DNA from ATCG to ATXY. And they're really doing that already. Not necessarily in humans, but you get my gist. That plays into the concept of biodiversity, which is a concept, believe me, I am so on board with. I think it is so important. And in fact, it's one of the reasons that I've disagreed largely with a lot of different ideas of genetic engineering, not just with humans, but with everything. Okay, is that you create effectively a monoculture of, say, a certain crop, certain plants, certain, whatever, and then one disease or whatever happens, and then suddenly it's all wiped out. And you have, you don't have the biodiversity to fall upon, say, some kind of redundancy that comes out of differences. I mean, now the concept of monoculture and biodiversity, I mean, that can be taken to a whole bunch of different areas of life, not just science or, not just biology, but also, of course, to philosophy and a lot of other ideas, which I personally do. Like I take biodiversity very, very seriously and think it's a core concept of survival and of choice, and choice is the very basis of freedom. And I mean, that's kind of the point that, that Juan's bringing up here, is that at the end of the day, or not just the end of the day, but in the next 100 years, in the next 1,000 years, perhaps even the next 1,000,000 years, how exactly does humanity carry on? How do we more guarantee humanity's ability to carry on? Is that by creating a certain genetic diversity, like a more extreme genetic diversity, to where you're actually changing, again, the base pairs of DNA to allow humanity to continue on? Is that something to consider? And he brings up the case of Mars. Look, if we go to Mars, to actually really thrive on Mars, his opinion, not necessarily mine, but to actually thrive on Mars, humanity is going to have to change. Like there's going to have to be genetic engineering involved to be able to survive there, not just putting on suits or doing whatever else. And maybe it even goes beyond that, just because of the different living conditions that humans have to be in, different levels of gravity, in various densities. I mean, just all these different things that you're going to have to deal with, that to stay effectively, remotely human, you are going to have to make certain changes, at very base levels within your genome. It's interesting. Now, I don't 100% agree on a lot of it, though. Like I said, I never really had heard that kind of idea of, well, look, we need to engage in biodiversity of humanity itself so that humanity can survive. I get it, and like his, the idea that he mentioned about the eddies of biology, to where things make changes, to where the dinosaurs got wiped out by a comet, to this. I mean, I have been, for the idea of the survivability of humanity, I've firmly been in the camp of that humanity needs to become a 2-planet species. I am so on board with that. I've been on board with that ever since Carl Sagan first said it, before I was even born, back in 1980. I'm really, really on board with this. Again, this is, it always comes down to a lot of ideas. Like, this is obviously, Juan is a person that agrees, and a lot of the scientists that he talked to, a lot of the researchers, they agree with the concept of biodiversity. They agree with, that well, we'd like humanity to survive. I have comments on that as well. But, to stick to the point. But then it comes down to what is it? So, we have some shared ground, some shared basis within which to communicate with each other. But then what does it come down to? It comes down to the solutions. This is such a big thing, like, philosophically, scientifically, all these different areas. I could agree with, like myself. Okay. I'm an anarchist. All right. I could agree with a lot of different hyphenated versions of anarchism, but because at the base, it does seem to be, of all forms of anarchism, it does seem to be about, okay, human freedom. It seems to be, how can we have choice? How can we have the freedom to engage in, voluntary actions, blah, 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 blah. How can we do all that? However, when it comes to solutions, that's where issues come in. That's where I start to argue. That's where I start to say, oh, no, hold on. I'm not on with your anarchism based upon your solution. And I think that this is also true in the scientific realm, is that sometimes you could agree with perhaps what people are saying in the abstract and where they want to go, but then they start talking about the solutions and you hit the brakes, slow it down. So, yeah, I'm on board with this. And, but before I get into perhaps some of the concerns, around it, I do want to say that there is this built-in idea, it seems, in Juan's talk, which was a great talk, by the way. Regardless of how much I agree with them or disagree with them, it was a great talk. There's this built-in assumption that humanity has to survive. Where does that assumption come from? I'm not saying I don't want humanity to survive. I most certainly do, but it's not like a requirement. And in fact, like the way that he's laying out effectively a disaster scenario, in that the way to answer that disaster scenario, the solution to this disaster scenario, that humanity one day may not be a part of the program anymore in this, malign universe, as he called it. Okay. Or as he quoted someone else calling it. All right. That the solution is that we have to, radically change the genetic makeup of certain portions of humanity, or create new genetic, humans that have different genetic makeups, but still have kind of the original humans as well. Okay. That's very, that's kind of the solution that he's laying out. Now, I get that, but again, like where is the requirement that humanity sort of, has to go on? Like, I'm lost on that end of things. Is again, I'm for it. I'm for the idea in the abstract of humanity living on, but I really don't, I don't like what, as obviously he seems to be a person of science. Okay. Where is the scientific principle that says humanity has to keep going? It's not there. I'm not a nihilist. Under certain definitions, nihilism, I'm certainly not. But yeah, I don't get it. In the galactic scheme of things, there is no requirement for humanity to continue. And the issue becomes is that when you start screwing around with a lot of things that have come out of evolution, out of the evolutionary process, that you could do a lot more harm than good in the grand scheme of things, than if humanity one day just, decided to pass on. Or not decided, but, that's just how the cookie crumbled. Imagine this, how about this? What if the dinosaurs, maybe like the Troodon, right? That was supposedly that 3-foot, bipedal dinosaur that could have been incredibly intelligent, right? What if the Troodon, said, well, the dinosaurs don't have to go. Would there be humans? No. So now, I'm not saying that I feel some kind of pressure to allow, perhaps the next, sapient species in the evolutionary process to come around. But it's a good bet that if there were dinosaurs, that the dinosaurs didn't die, say, because the Alvarez hypothesis, because a comet came down or something like this, that humanity would have never been a thing. So you raise, there's big questions to be asked here, huge philosophical and ethical questions to be asked here, even beyond the question of, can we even do this? Which it seems, based upon a lot of the examples that Juan brought up in the TED Talk, you can. And I guess I worry too, And I mean, and admittedly, I have to give Juan credit because he said that there are very legitimate and real concerns around doing this sort of thing. And I'm sure much of what I'm talking about, maybe he knows and maybe he's thinking about, or all the people that are involved in it are certainly thinking about. And I think that's, and I'm glad that he said that, a couple times at least. That was very comforting. But I want to touch on a few things here. And the first thing is that, there was a lot of talk about prosthetics in that, and of replacing and creating enhanced human parts and all this different stuff, replacing entire organs. Like that was a major thrust of that entire TED Talk. Now, this is going to sound funny to you. Okay. And it's funny to me, but it's brilliant. In that Stephanie and I, we were watching, we were having dinner, and during dinner, we watch some form of video, usually, or we're listening to audio, one or the other. But anyway, a favorite pastime of ours is to watch, honestly, softcore porn, while we're having dinner, while we're eating. And there's this show that was on Cinemax just a few years ago. It was called Forbidden Science. Now, this show, in fact, I want to do a review of it for Patreon with Stephanie, but I'll tell you a little bit about it right now. This show, Forbidden Science, okay, it takes place in the future, in the not so far future, and it's about this gigantic company called Forever, just the number 4 and the word ever, and they build clones, they build all these VR technologies, all this different stuff, and like they can replicate your your lost loved one and all this. Now, you wouldn't think it. Okay, so first off, the acting's atrocious. The effects, obviously not top notch. Okay, but I mean, the acting is really, really bad. But if you decide to go look for the show, again, it's called Forbidden Science, don't let the acting stop you, because the writing, the stories being told, and honestly, the sex is pretty hot too, but all of that was, and Stephanie's nodding her head, but like the writing, the ideas, the storyline overall is brilliant. Like, it's great science fiction. It's high science fiction, in my opinion. Some of the things that they're bringing up. And one of the things that a character within the story, kind of asks is that he has to, I mean, this is kind of his direct quote is, how many organs make the man? And the purpose, the point of that quote, when you get it within the context of the show, is that, okay, you keep replacing organs, you keep replacing this, but is the man just his brain, just the consciousness that's in his brain? Is consciousness just in the brain? Is he just that? And then what happens? Because that's a big thing that Juan was bringing up in the TED Talk, is like, can we just transplant consciousness, from different body to different body to different body to different device to different whatever? And that's where my red flags, they start, waving like the 4th of July. Because I am not 100% convinced that, and in fact, there isn't 100%, proof that consciousness, that what makes a human being sits solely within the brain and within, some various, mental patterns. That's a big question. It's not just big, it's a big if. I mean, if is a question, but it's a big if. I love the phrase. In fact, I can't take credit for it. Jerry Kaplan, who just a brilliant guy in the AI, in the research of AI. He said, he calls it the grandpa in a can problem. Meaning that, okay, you could transfer what you think is grandpa's, consciousness or memories into, some robotic body or into effectively a can. And, like, how exactly is that going to work? I mean, when the kids run up to grandpa and say, hey, grandpa, would you want to go to the beach or something? And grandpa's just in this, at best, perhaps some kind of automaton body. Okay. And Jerry Kaplan's whole point is, look, that's not grandpa. Grandpa's dead. It's over. Like, stop. That's not, because grandpa is more perhaps than just his consciousness. I'm not saying consciousness isn't some kind of prime force. Okay. I'm just saying that perhaps we are more than that. And perhaps like these enhanced hearts and all these different things, could create completely different aspects, or, completely different, a completely different person. Because maybe there's more to all this. Maybe, certain senses that we have based upon the organs and the hundreds of connections that our brain makes to our body, make us more of who we are than we are willing to admit. So I am not convinced about, just slapping on prosthetics, transferring consciousness, and doing all of these different things, is actually totally conducive, to the human condition and to what makes a person a human being. In fact, I'm reminded one of my favorite shows of all time, one of my favorite Star Treks, and just one of my favorite captains, even though I know there aren't exactly a whole ton, right? But in Star Trek Enterprise, I remember Captain Archer. There was an episode where he was dealing with an incredibly advanced species, and this is the quote that he said to the species, because the species was just fucking everything up because they thought that they are so much greater, than the little humans and all of this different business. And here's the quote: Maybe you've devolved into beings with abilities I can't comprehend, but you've paid a hell of a price. You've lost compassion and empathy, things that give life meaning. If that's what it takes to be advanced, I don't want any part of it. And of course, I can't say it half as good as Scott Bakula did, but I get the point. And I think it's something to consider, is that what actually creates empathy? I mean, is it, perhaps the electromagnetic fields that your heart generates? I mean, there's all these different ideas that we're not 100% certain on, but that we're just going to start, slapsticking different technologies onto human beings. And it doesn't have to be that way. Because I've mentioned this, I think I might have mentioned it in Patreon episodes. Brian Johnson, not the lead singer to AC/DC, as great a guy as he is, or the ex-lead singer, I guess you should say. But Brian Johnson, who is one of the founders of Braintree, the payment processing software service out of that was originally out of Massachusetts, who went on to found what was it called, the OS Fund, which is about changing, kind of the, improving the overall quality of life, not the standard of living, but the quality of life. Those are two different things. The quality of life of humanity as a whole. And then also he announced recently a new company that he started called Kernel, as in microkernel, or, as in a system kernel. And Kernel's idea is to somehow, fix, say, when something goes defective on the human brain that causes some kind of medical condition, how can we possibly remap the pathways of the brain to allow someone to get full utility of their brain again? Or could we perhaps improve upon the brain, create, greater levels of intelligence, et cetera, et cetera? All interesting ideas, and something I'm not necessarily opposed to, but I'm also not too opposed to it based upon how he wants to implement it. And this is the key here. This is where it's very different from, I think, a lot of what Juan was talking about in the TED Talk. And that is, he said that this would be specifically, that kernel technology would be something that doesn't have to be surgically entered into the body. It doesn't have to replace anything. It's something that could sit outside, and yet you could take full advantage of it. It could be just like a little clip that you could, put around your ear or something like this, but it would give you all of these enhancements. But the fact is that you could remove it. Again, we talk about, the very core of human freedom is choice. That's part of that choice. I'm not saying I'm against growing new hearts and all this. I think a lot of that is wonderful technology, but you have to ask that question again. How many more organs make up the man? Is it just the brain? Or did the Egyptians maybe have something when they said, we need to save the heart? Or we need to put this other body part in a Canopig jar because this is what makes up the person. Maybe they knew something. This is a gigantic subject, and, I get it. Again, I love the idea of, humanity, of there being, I'm not opposed to the idea of there being biodiversity within humanity itself. To some degree, it already exists, but I mean, like a more drastic, a much larger difference. I'm not necessarily opposed to that. However, I do have issues with that as well, and I want to talk about that for a minute. Okay, so again, there's ways that you can improve humans, that you can improve humanity, a human's performance that do not require, surgery, that do not require replacing parts. That's the beauty of what I think Brian Johnson's trying to do with Kernel. I think that's awesome. All right, especially compared to what Ray Kurzweil wants to do with nanobots and all that. I run into all kinds of issues there. So, but, understand too that I don't want to stand in your way of choice of being able to, engage or, become a guinea pig or, whatever you want to change your genetic makeup. I mean, I honestly, I wouldn't stop you. My concern is when it becomes state sponsored. My concern also comes in is when there is a state, and also when you have some aspects of the culture that we have today. And this is another area where I have a very serious concern, is that if you go changing humans, certain humans or you create multiple species of humans effectively that, and obviously there's been multiple species of effectively Homo sapiens before, or, of the genus Homo, right? You've had Neanderthals, you've had Denisovans, we've had all different kinds that have coexisted at various points. So again, I don't really have an issue with that. But here's kind of where an issue comes in, is that as we can see, and this is something I kind of hinted at earlier in the show, as we can see, there are groups of people, and maybe there's no way we're ever going to get rid of these groups of people, and we just have to mitigate and deal with it. But there are groups of people who, just based upon you having a different skin color, want to hurt you, want to tell you where you can live and cannot live, and a whole slew of other things. We have a culture, just in the United States alone, forget about the rest of the world, where you get completely judged just based around your belief system. Even when people obviously have no clue or really great understanding of your belief system, and they're not treating you as an individual to what do you think as far as how your faith goes? We live in a culture where people, based upon, where you were born, just upon where you were born, regardless of any other factor, because you weren't born in the good old US of A, you are not allowed to, you are an inferior being. You're not going to talk to me just because you weren't born in the Western world. You're a moron. This is there's a lot of people out there that really think that way. I challenge you to prove me otherwise. I don't know how many pictures of Tina Tequila, doing Sieg Heil, and kicking around the Reichstag we need to finally admit that there are people that think this way. Now, what happens when you really create an entire, alternate humanity? I worry that, and especially one that perhaps, has maybe some superior abilities or something. I mean, you can say, I love this. This is the argument that comes up, right, with artificial intelligence. Well, if it's an artificial intelligence, if it's a superior intelligence, it will treat us. It won't kill us. It won't kill humanity. It won't kill the inferiors. It'll treat us like a pet. Baby, have you seen how people treat their pets? How many events do I have to go to where I see supposedly peaceful parents and all this other shit kicking their dogs? How many? I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. I'm worried about, these alternate humans, or perhaps these advanced humans. I don't think that they're just going to treat us all nice like a fish in a tank. Because especially if it's people, that have already grown up as they are, like if this change is going to happen, like they're going to genetically alter adults, perhaps, to go and do a mission to Mars or do whatever else. I don't agree that there's ever going to be any kind of like race war in the popular concept, but when this kind of shit comes around, ooh, yeah, I could see one coming fast. Again, I'm not opposed to this kind of stuff getting developed, or people wanting to do it, or people wanting to, again, to be the guinea pig for it and all of that. Rock and roll. You go for it. But my concern is when people clearly haven't had enough of a education, okay, to be able to, to understand some very basic concepts of the human condition. And also when there is a monopoly on violence, perhaps, AKA governments, that under democracies, when, humanity ATXY instead of humanity ATCG gets in charge, that they can start saying, well, humanity ATCG, you're the problem. You smell, you're stinky. We're going to put you behind a wall, or we're going to kill you. Yes, that could be a real future. And it's not all right. We've got a lot of work to do before I think that it's a good idea to start fucking around with humanity in this way. I think, I'll admit it. I never thought about the idea that creating a biodiversity within humanity, like a really extreme biodiversity within humanity, is a great way for the species to survive. That's a great point to bring up. And honestly, I wouldn't argue against it. However, I would argue that we need to be really, really careful how we're going forward with that. And we need to I think there needs to be a little housework done before that becomes a full-on laid out reality. That's what I think. So anyway, to the Sovryn Tech listener, thank you for sharing that TED Talk. I thought it was fascinating and totally worth talking about on Sovryn Tech. I mean, just a major deal. So anyway, all right, before we get onto another subject, let's get off of that. Before we get onto another subject, I do want to thank one of our sponsors for Sovryn Tech, of course, that being AgoristhHosting.com. That's AGORIST hosting.com. Baby, let me tell you, we talk about companies being ethical. We talk about people that actually get it, that understand how the world really works and how things should be. AgoristhHosting.com is one of those companies. And so if you want to get web hosting, I mean, a web presence is so important, and you want your web presence to really, in my opinion, you really want it to reflect. I mean, this is just me. Maybe you feel the same. I want it to reflect me through and through. Because your web presence is in many ways just as, your digital life is just as important as your, meat space, your physical life, right? So Agorist Hosting is here for, to help make that a reality. Okay. They have great customer service. The Bitcoin preferred. We love cryptocurrencies here, baby. And they are absolutely Bitcoin preferred. That Bitcoin is baked into their business. And man, how about Bitcoin, right? $900 a coin. Woo, let's do this. If you want to do something with it, that nice little increase in your holdings, you could do a whole lot worse. In fact, I'll tell you, you can't do much better than dealing with AgoristhHosting.com. And if you want to get into some real free markets like OpenBazaar, you got to see how this company sets up OpenBazaar for you. They do it better than they. After a fashion, they do OpenBazaar better than OpenBazaar does. After a fashion, you got to understand what I mean by that. Okay, but I mean, they will get you set up as a business on OpenBazaar, and I think that's a wonderful thing. But they're here to help activists. They get liberty, baby. They understand. They want to help you out, and they've got all the right moves. Bicontinental backups and support. I mean, they got the whole thing. You want to deal with them. AgoristhHosting.com. It's AGORIST hosting.com. Let them know that you heard about it through the Golden Stallion. Believe me, they're going to know who you are. They'll even send you a nice little woo when they get back in touch with you. At least I imagine they will, because they know who you're talking about. They're fans of the show. Just some of the best people on the planet dealing in this. AgoristhHosting.com, and we thank them for supporting Sovryn Tech. All right, let's get into another story here. In fact, let's do a little HackSec. Geez, I feel bad because I was all ready for tech history in this one. But I think we're going to have to bump off tech history a bit because we're already an hour and 20, almost an hour and 30 into the show. But let's get into HackSec. Got a doozy of a story here for you. So, and of course, HackSec is that section of the show where we talk about issues of hacking and security. It is, arguably the most important segment of the show in a lot of ways. And like I say, it's the one that really will never go anywhere. So let's break into this story. And this one is... Well, this might not surprise anybody, but I want to make sure it's known well and good that this is the police state that we're dealing with. And this story is coming from consumerist.com. Of course, link in the show notes for episode 204. Just go to sovryntech.com and you can find all that there. Smartphones, let's read the story here. We'll start off. It's court rules that police can force you to tell them your phone's passcode. Woo! And this is in the United States. The story is dated December 13th, 2016. This is fresh. Smartphones have taken over our lives faster than the law is able to deal with. For a few years now, it's kind of been an open legal question whether or not law enforcement can force you to provide them with the password or PIN you use to unlock your phone. A few previous courts have ruled no, that having to provide your passcode is tantamount to self-incriminating testimony, thus breaking your Fifth Amendment rights. But recently, an appeals court in Florida has found the other way. In this particular case, as Courthouse News reports, the phone is a significant part of the alleged crime in question. A woman out shopping in Florida saw a man crouch down and aim a phone under her skirt, presumably to snap photos. She confronted the man, who then ran out of the store. However, police were later able to track him down based on his car's license plate number. When police picked up the suspect and arrested him for voyeurism, he agreed that they could search his phone. And an iPhone 5 that would presumably have any illicit photos he'd snapped on it. Before they actually could, however, he revoked consent and refused to tell police his 4-digit passcode. The police eventually went and got a search warrant, but without the passcode, were still unable to search the device. Conceptually, it's a similar situation to what the FBI and Apple argued out this spring in the wake of the San Bernardino mass shooting. Law enforcement could, in theory, attempt to brute force force the password. There are only 10,000 possible combinations between 000 and 999 after all, but entering the wrong one more than 10 times will force the phone to permanently erase any data it has stored. Logistically and legally, however, it's very different for one key reason. This suspect is still alive. In the San Bernardino case, law enforcement could not even first try to compel a passcode from the suspect because the suspect was deceased. In this case, investigators have a person to ask. Initially, a trial judge denied the state's motion to compel the suspect to give up his phone's passcode. However, last week, the Florida Court of Appeals 2nd District reversed that finding, determining that the passcode itself is not connected to any criminal data on the phone. Quote, the information sought by the state, that which it would require the defendant to provide, is the passcode, end quote, the opinion reads. Quote, the state has not asked him to produce the photographs or videos on the phone. By providing the passcode, he would not be acknowledging that the phone contains evidence of video voyeurism. Moreover, although the passcode would allow the state access to the phone and therefore to a source of potential evidence, the state has a warrant to search the phone. The source of evidence had already been uncovered. So, the story goes on here. Other courts in recent years have held the opposite. In 2014, a different court in Virginia found that making someone tell you their passcode can be forcing them into self-incrimination, and that the Fifth Amendment protects against that. Similarly, a U.S. District Court in Michigan held the same position in 2010, saying that forcing someone to provide a passcode qualifies as testimony because it requires a suspect to communicate knowledge that they have. Those rulings have separated passcodes from non-common fingerprint-based phone locks. The court in Virginia, as well as, and this is an important story because we brought this up on Sovryn.tech back when it happened. This was about maybe a year ago. I'll read here, as well as another in California, that's the case we talked about on Sovryn.tech, have ruled that basically something you know is different than something you have or are. So fingerprints can be compelled for phone locks the same way as they can be for, well, fingerprint checks, or in the same way as one can compel handwriting or voice samples, the argument goes. And in fact, earlier this year, the Justice Department issued a warrant that let investigators in California walk into a building and make everyone on the property use their fingerprints to unlock their phones. How about that doozy right there? Stallion breaking in. Woo! Not just one person. They got a warrant for the whole building and said everybody is compelled. You need to use your fingerprints. And well, if you're, like me perhaps, and you have a phone that doesn't have a fingerprint reader, you were in okay shape. But if you're using an iPhone or, something where the fingerprint was even activated, you were in a degree of trouble in that case. And you had nothing to say about it. And in fact, because it was in that entire building, it may have had nothing to do with you at all. It's just like, varying degrees of separation. But you happen to live where some other, who knows, somebody very innocent or perhaps a real scumbag happen to be living in that building, but you pay the price because you use the technology that can completely infringe upon your ability to control your privacy, which is a major thing that we talk about on this show all the time. Reading on, the Florida court in part uses the whole fingerprint thing as a reason why the suspect should be compelled to provide his passcode. Quote, we are not inclined to believe that the Fifth Amendment should provide greater protection to individuals who passcode protect their iPhones with letter and number combinations than to individuals who use their fingerprint as the passcode, end quote, the opinion continues. Quote, compelling an individual to place his finger on the iPhone would not be a protected act. It would be an exhibition of physical characteristic, the forced production of physical evidence, not unlike being compelled to provide a blood sample or provide a handwriting example, end quote. Quote, this is a case of surrender and not testimony, end quote, it concludes. Holy shit. What? I want to just, this is directly from the state, from Florida. I want to read this quote again. We are not inclined to believe that the Fifth Amendment should provide greater protection to individuals. Just stop the sentence right there. You don't have to read the rest of it. What do you mean? Of course, any of these, the Bill of Rights, all of this stuff is supposed to absolutely protect the individual as far as it can possibly go. The default should not be that, you can at any point remove a certain protection, say from a right listed in the Bill of Rights. I mean, again, rights, the idea of rights coming from the government is nonsense in the first place. And that whole statement takes away from that as well, that it's a part of your humanity or something like this, right? Or that God gave it to you, whatever that means. I mean, this is absolute. I mean, this is just an erosion of what you thought you were allowed to, do and control and have. So, I mean, we could go on and on, about, how slowly a lot, like the pervasiveness of certain technologies that you think are based around security eventually loop around and retroactively destroy all of the security that you thought you've ever known. Okay. For example, biometrics. I remember, when I've worked at various tech companies, a lot of them, it was really at the cusp of when biometrics was becoming a thing, like APC or Lenovo would, release their fingerprint readers and all this different stuff. Okay. And at the time when it comes out, it's like, oh, wow, this is really cool. This reminds me of something out of a science fiction movie or something. But you never consider that 10 years down the line, that could effectively be used in a court case to say, listen, Jack, you're going to have to, cough up your fingerprint. You never thought about it that way. And just like a lot of people said, and this is something I have to consider because I didn't even really think about it. The idea that, okay, yeah, with the Dark Android project, which is something I started, you can go to darkandroid.info to read about it, where you can find out about how you can create a more secure device. One of my criteria for having a secure device was to not have a fingerprint reader. Guess what? The very inclusion of effectively a new technology, okay, that being the fingerprint readers on iPhones, has just damned the very concept of a password, that somehow you don't have to hand that over. Oh, I see. I've talked about how fingerprint readers are security exploits writ large. You could take an iPhone, you could use that fancy dancy, Touch ID that costs however many billions to develop. You could put it on somebody's nipple and it would instantly unlock. Okay, right? You can do that. That's how bad that technology is. But did you ever think of it as a security exploit in that eventually it would break all past forms of security for you? No, it never crossed my mind. I'll admit it. I see the dangers of constantly adding on new ways to secure things and not removing the old ones, or, not necessarily removing the old ones. But this is crazy. That this new technology that you think is oh so goddamn secure is now being used to thwart what you have been doing forever and what you thought was effectively safe. But this is the very nature of governments, of course. This is what they do every day. They're like, oh yeah, well, let's see, how can we get around this one? That's how they think. And, it's when... The other thing to consider here too. Now, look, if this guy was taking his phone and he was taking pictures up women's skirts, all right, this guy is scum. This guy's a fucking loser. There's, I'm not going to argue for this guy, for 2 seconds. Okay. But if that's, even if that's the deal, look, the government cherry picks the cases, okay, that they want to use to hand over. There's another case that I think was actually in Virginia. Maybe it was some of what they were referencing in this story. Okay. To where a guy, it is widely believed, and maybe even there's a degree of proof that he is on his hard drives, his encrypted hard drives, that he has, pedophilia, he has that kind of material, terrible things like child porn, which are absolutely horrendous and terrible. But now they are wanting to, they want companies to hand over, okay, you got to hand over the keys so that we can break this encryption. We want to be able to do this. Look, when we talk about wanting to have secure technologies and all this, understand, we're not defending the scumbags. We're not defending, perhaps the real violent people out there, perhaps like really violent terrorists, blah, blah, blah. We're not defending pedophiles. We're not defending anything like that. We are defending humanity's right to their, humanity's rights, humanity's liberties. That's what we're defending. I will judge these people right and fucking left for, for just being that's disgusting to be using a smartphone to go and do that. But at the same time, just because some guy goes and does that with a smartphone, that means that I lose all my rights to security via passcode? How does that make sense anywhere? It doesn't. But this is what government does. They cherry pick the really bad cases, like the one in Virginia. Oh, we need to break encryption because this guy has, child porn. Or the San Bernardino case. Well, this guy shot up however many people. Apple, you need to turn over the keys to the iPhone to us. Okay, as to where, once they open the door just a little bit on all the security and encryption and whatever else, okay, they're going to get rid of the door completely, and they'll use it for everything, not just the ugly cases. They'll use it on, maybe you didn't pay a tax, or, maybe you claimed you were here, instead you were over there. Whatever the case may be, it might be the most benign thing, something that is none of the government's fucking business. It's nobody else's business. But you do that, you hand it over because of these extreme cases, and then suddenly, oh shit. That's how these people operate. That's how all this works. And it's terrible, because you want to do something about people that are engaging in such, atrocities, or, such terrible, heinous acts against other people. You want to do something about that. Okay. But this, screwing over the entire human species because of, one or two or however many terrible people are out there is not the answer to that. The answer is to dealing with the individual, but breaking technologies that everybody uses is not dealing with an individual. That is affecting society at large. And that's a problem. But again, that's the way government thinks. So, all that said, I just wanted you to be aware that, like, if you think you're going to go and you're going to go to, I don't know, say you are in a situation with the police, and now we have to consider that, like I thought before with the Dark Android project. Well, look, you want to use a passcode because they can't compel you to give that passcode. Well, maybe now they can. That's a huge problem. So what do we do from there? How do we keep things private? As people that aren't scumbags. It's a big question. It's something I have to think about. What exactly do you do with that? I mean, do you do double encryption on things that are that important or whatever? And it just goes to show, like, the smartphone is such an ugly attack vector on your life. It really is. It's becoming that more than anything. The smartphone is, as much as it may assist you and help you, in many ways, it's becoming just another attack vector that the government gets to use against you. What else can I say? I hate it, and we'll have to, I'm going to be thinking about this for a while, but it's important for you to keep in mind that your passcode may not be enough to get you, to keep you out of, potentially incriminating or ugly situation where, there could have been no victim at all. I mean, in this case, I think there was a victim, but maybe there won't be, in your case. In fact, I hope there wouldn't be. Ugly. Very, very ugly, but it's a reality out there. So anyway, let's move on. But before we do, I want to mention another sponsor of the show, and that is, of course, one of my favorites. Here's something, to where, I mean, I don't know, maybe you could go bury it in your backyard or something, but at the very least, it's not, no passwords, going to affect this. And that is gold and silver, baby. Real cold storage, more secure storage of your wealth. And if you want to get precious metals, if you want to get gold and silver, I want you to go to Roberts & Roberts Brokerage. Here's the website. You go to gold.zog.ninja, or you can go to rrbi.co, but let them know the Golden Stallion sent you. Okay, they sent you there to get golden. Woo! Believe me, they, like I said earlier with agorist.hosting.com, they're going to know who you're talking about. The sponsors on this show, they know the message, they understand, they listen to the show. Okay, and so helping them out, I mean, it's this beautiful little synergistic effect. It's great. Okay, so if you want to, again, diversify, hey, Bitcoin's up to 900, baby, around there. Maybe it's time to diversify a little bit if you want, or you can hold, I understand, but understand that Roberts & Roberts Brokerage is a Bitcoin preferred business. They know Bitcoin is the real deal. It's real money. They want to deal with you in it. They know it's the easiest way to interact with, with other individuals. Okay. And to do business. So go ahead, use some of that Bitcoin and grab some gold, grab some silver, grab some platinum, palladium, whatever, get some coins, do your thing. Okay, so Roberts & Roberts Brokerage, again, gold.zog.ninja, and I cannot thank them enough for being such a long-time sponsor of Sovryn Tech. Now, let's get into another bit of business here. And in fact, right now, I think I'm going to skip, where are we in? Hour 40. I'm going to skip right to the climax. Okay, we'll save. I had an IoT story. I also wanted to get into tech history this week, but we'll save it And I promise you next week, you'll get all the segments. Okay. I got you covered. So I'll be back in the studio and we'll go through all this stuff. And I've had a great tech history that I've been wanting to share with you. And it's about the Commodore 64. And so we'll get into that next week. And tech history, that's a segment I know a lot of people are really excited about. I will be doing tech history, like that segment I'm going to have be around for quite some time, because I think it's really important, because then you can kind of learn about it. I think with an understanding of the importance of tech history is that when you understand history, I mean, you could say this in the abstract, but certainly with technology, if you understand where a lot of technologies come from, I think you can kind of keep a watchful eye of what, say, a new technology is going to do, or what it has the potential, even like cases and all this. Like, I mean, the legal case around, again, I'm still, my mind is still boggled. Okay, that the introduction of biometrics, that the introduction of a fingerprint reader is effectively being used to make the argument that passwords should no longer be, whatever's in your. I mean, think about how far this can go. Because again, you're not supposed to. You're effectively supposed to have what under Western concepts of law, you're supposed to have the right to whatever's in your head. Right? I mean, what did Thomas Jefferson say? I stand against anything that's a tyranny to the mind of man. I mean, this is really a government saying, no, what is in your head is not secure. Even your thoughts belong to us if we say so. If we make a law that says so. That's really how far this goes. This Florida case is not just about fingerprint readers. This is a big fucking deal. And I would have never thought that happens. I think we need to, and this is a big part of, the history of tech, hold suspect almost every technology to ask this question going forward. How can this be used to circumvent a certain technology that I relied upon in the past? Because it's exactly what this case is doing. And of course, it highlights the importance of getting rid of governments entirely, but, peacefully, of course. But that goes, I would hope on Sovryn Tech that goes without saying. Woo, yay, anarchy. Anyway, let's get into the Climax this week. And this is something I'm going to play off of. I just realized that a lot of the things I was saying that I talked about in episode 204, I really talked about in episodes 203, because episode 204 is when, what did we do, baby? We talked Star Wars for over an hour. What did we do? An hour and 20? Talking about Rogue One. Now, there were some aspects there were certain subjects that people actually wanted me to talk about during my Rogue One review that I did not get the opportunity to talk about at that time. And so I do want to, I want to talk about some of them here. So we're going to talk a little Star Wars. Okay. And I'm going to put up the big red flag of saying, or yellow flag, I guess, of saying spoiler alerts, folks, spoiler alerts. I cannot guarantee that I won't spoil something here, but we're going to talk about more than just Rogue One. And I think there's a couple points that I want to get into. Maybe I can't get into all of them, but that I think are really, really important. And of course, the Climax is the part of Sovryn Tech where I can talk about whatever the hell I want to talk about. I can talk about movies, TV shows, comic books, a topic. I can talk about a tech. Hell, I can talk about anything. And in this case, I want to talk a little bit more about Star Wars because, frankly, I read an article this week that I thought was one of the just so stupid, coming from a guy that really isn't that stupid. But it raises an interesting point, and I want to break into it. And it actually sits very nicely with this show because it has to do with the concept of democracy and governance and all that itself. So this is from the website Big Think, which Big Think, a couple of years ago, I think sort of when it started, they were doing those really short YouTube videos. Like they'd have Michio Kaku and some others. They'd even have Penn Jillette. I love Penn Jillette. They'd have a bunch of these different characters, or, not characters, but people, just kind of lay out a concept, a big idea, that they think. And lately, I think they've sort of lost their way because now they're really, I've seen some videos that they've done with people that I'm like, they're an idiot. Like, I know them personally and they're, they have no business telling people about big ideas. And I really don't think it's just in the eye of the beholder. Anyway, Big Think, now that I guess they do articles, not just YouTube videos. And this is from a guy, Scotty Hendricks, but he's quoting a lot of David Brin. Now, David Brin is kind of a quasi-libertarian. I have good friends who I know who have interacted with him, and they've been less than impressed with some of his, again, it comes down to solutions, right? Even though they might agree with him on a bunch of different things, what are David Brin's solutions? I have problems with David Brin's solutions. The idea of covalence, that like we can't, like, I mean, one of David Brin's big shticks, if you read his book, The Transparent Society, he talks about, I mean, credit to him for being very prescient in how the future would end up, decades later after he wrote that book. But he talks about how, look, privacy is dead. Privacy, stop caring about it. I just totally disagree with him on that. So again, always comes down to solutions, right? Even though people could at a baseline agree with each other about, various aspects of humanity and human freedom. So anyway, this story from Big Think is How to See Star Wars for What It Really Is, and it's from December 18th, 2016. So obviously they're writing this as a marketing ploy because Rogue One had just come out, a couple days before. So I'll talk about it here, which, let me tell you something. Star Wars, Star Wars being talked about on Sovryn Tech is no marketing ploy. I talk about it all the time, and I complain all the time about how people only talk about Star Wars when a new movie comes out. It pisses me off to no end. Before I actually read the story, I also want to say that my thoughts are absolutely with a genuine heroine of mine, a genuine hero. That being Carrie Fisher, who has lived a hell of a life, and Princess Leia is probably my favorite Star Wars character. And she, a couple days, or I guess it was on the 23rd or something like that. Of course, this is being recorded on December 24th, but on December 23rd, 2016, she had a heart attack while she was on a plane and landing in LAX. And right now, it looked like things were improving. Right now, though, there's no good or bad news, apparently. So definitely my thoughts are out for Carrie Fisher. I hope she makes it. I really want her as the leader of the resistance in the upcoming movies. And just as a person, I don't like seeing people die. So anyway, let's read this story here, and, maybe Princess Leia will be a subject that'll come up during it. Star Wars is one of the most successful film franchises in history. With millions of fans and several spin-off films coming into production, the series seems destined to continue for years to come. An excellent example of the hero's journey. The films are great fun and are a decent way to spend a few hours. But in watching the movies, have you ever considered what the moral might be? Is there a message? Science fiction author David Brin, author of The Postman, Star Tide Rising, and an astronomer who works at NASA, thinks he knows what the moral is, and it might not be one that you like. He suggests that Star Wars, quote, belongs to our dark past, a long tyrannical epoch of fear, illogic, despotism, and demagoguery that our ancestors struggled desperately to overcome, and that we are at last starting to emerge from, aided by the scientific and egalitarian spirit that George Lucas openly despises, end quote. Oh, and he notes who he thinks the most evil character is, Yoda. As he put it, quote, I do hope folks will notice, for example, that Yoda in Attack of the Clones orders the Jedi into a suicide charge that kills most of them, then conveniently shows up with the new clone army that he ordered. An act of treachery and betrayal so stunning that I had to watch the movie twice, end quote. Quote, I have defied folks to name one time when he says or does anything that is indisputably wise. The trail of destruction that follows him and every decision that he makes is inarguable and overwhelming, end quote. The face of a tyrant. If we look at it from Brin's perspective, the story reads like this. In a galaxy where people are biologically disposed to being able to use magic, a group of those chosen few are asked to protect democracy and liberty. Not only do they foul it up horribly, but their leader orders most of them into suicide missions, and the one person who comes close to doing his job only manages it by means of a coup attempt, which is foiled by a poorly trained member of his own cult. After that, the dysfunctional republic, which never does anything, collapses. The Empire, which seems much more on top of things, takes over. Billions are killed, but the story shows us that the main villain is redeemed merely by saving another chosen individual. No mention is made of the possibility of Darth Vader still being rather evil or having more to do to redeem himself at this point. In the most recent film, The New Republic is never shown doing anything but being destroyed. It is the First Order and a dictatorship that manages to build an impossibly large space station using the energy of an entire star, an impressive level of technical achievement. Oh, and all the people responsible for half of this are related because you need to be biologically disposed to use the Force. These mutant demigods are the cause of, solution to, and focus of all the problems that kill billions of people who are not mentioned again after the plot point passes. Now, Okay. There's more here. All right, let me read this. However, he does note, however, that the first film had egalitarian democratic messages. In that film, the ways of the Force can be learned. Obi-Wan even offers to train Han Solo in the Force. But these messages are largely gone by the sixth film, as is the possibility to learn use of the Force. Maybe Dr. Brin is just looking too far into it. After all, it's just a story. So it kind of goes on, but look, there is so much. David Brin is so far off in everything that he's saying here. Like he clearly hasn't really, it's funny. They're saying, is Dr. Brin looking too far into it? No, he obviously didn't look far enough. First off, with the concept of Yoda, yes, am I biased? Of course, I'm a Star Wars fan. Sure, I'll admit to the bias, but I can back up everything I'm saying very easily. Like off the top of my head, I have no notes in front of me, okay? And I can debunk everything that David Brin is saying. So the first thing is that I have defied folks to name one time when he says or does anything that is indisputably wise, in reference to Yoda. Well, two things. And they're not necessarily new. Like it's not something that where Disney redid it to somehow make it better. Like the hints of this stuff is there. In Empire Strikes Back, of course, when we first meet Yoda, not chronologically in universe, but chronologically in our world, in the real world, he makes the comment, wars don't make one great. Luke is saying, I'm looking for a great warrior. And Yoda says, wars don't make one great. That comment alone, I think, is very wise, but you get more of that when you read beyond the movies. Okay. Now, if David Brin's just talking about the movies, fine. But guess what? Star Wars is so much more than the movies. In fact, I argue, and I've said this many times, I argue that everything outside of the movies is exactly what gives Star Wars its longevity. It's what keeps people excited about it. Okay. I love Star Wars, but I'll be honest, like I probably wouldn't stick with it so much if I didn't have the novels and the comic books and the video games that have existed over the decades of my life. How could I? I watch these movies all the time, but you really can only watch them so much. Okay, and part of the excitement of watching them again is applying some of the new things that you learn about the Star Wars universe and seeing how they affect new films. Kind of like how Rogue One clearly changes a lot of the notions that we have of A New Hope, the movie A New Hope. So you can't, if David Brin just wants to fucking cherry pick, okay, the movies, then that's what he did. And he's probably, frankly, I hate to psychologize, but really, David Brin, you're just pissed off that it's such a big fucking deal. You're pissed off that your stories aren't doing billions. Let's be honest here. I get it. I've had to defend, I've been to the conferences, at the conventions. Okay. I've had to defend Star Wars to some big names. I know Harlan Ellison hated Star Wars. I know lots of these different people hate Star Wars. They call it fast food science fiction, or it's just science fantasy or something like that. Okay. Then that's what it is. Leave it the fuck alone. Deal with it. Really, a lot of these guys are just so pissed off that their stories didn't reach that level of success. I think that's a lot of what's going on there. But now Yoda, again, going back to Yoda, that idea of wars don't make one great. When you watch Star Wars Rebels, you get a vision of Yoda, and it's actually Yoda coming from Dagobah, who, and he's talking to Ezra, and he says, we were wrong. We were wrong fighting that war. Wars are not the ways to solve things. He lays the whole thing out. He even says the Jedi were consumed by evil. He's admitting, David Brin's kind of right, but he doesn't know that the Star Wars story is saying that David Brin is right, that's part of the story, that these people are, effectively a very problematic, that the Jedi were a problem. And in fact, even before Rebels, it was in season 5 of Clone Wars, back when George Lucas still owned the thing. So it's not like Disney just rewrote it, but you had the story of Barra Sophie, where, she says, and you find out that the Jedi Temple is built on top of the Sith Temple, and the Jedi were infected by the dark side, that they were the problem. They were causing a problem with the war. It's so funny because David Brin's like, nobody notices this. No, the fucking story told you Barra Sophie was right. She wasn't right to go, engage in her own violence, but she was right. That yes, the Jedi are the problem, but Star Wars admits that. Do you see how, so David Brin, he's right, but he doesn't know, he hasn't watched enough fucking Star Wars to understand that that's part of the story. That's the idea. man, I mean, I read this and it ticked me off. And he can be David Brin. I mean, and not to say that he can't back up a lot of it, but he can be such a dick. Like, I mean, you know, such a braggadocious asshole sometimes. And he's so far off with this. Now, the idea, here's another point where I think he didn't think hard enough, you know, about what exactly Star Wars says. I don't know that there's a guarantee in any way that the Force ever worked, that there was this guarantee that Force use was something that is necessarily genetically passed down. In fact, there's the theory that the reason Palpatine was so obsessed with Anakin Skywalker was because Anakin Skywalker could potentially have children. And that idea has been around for a while, like could have children, like he could breed Force users. As to where before, Force users could be, I mean, and this is talked about in some of the new canon books, where like an uncle can be a Force user, but a cousin isn't, and a nephew isn't necessarily. So like there's no condition that says it's a hereditary thing that people can do that. I agree that, yeah, it's strange that, you know, it's the idea used to seem to be that anybody could learn to use the Force. But maybe some people just had a greater strength in it, and that's not a part of the, you know, part of the program anymore. Sure. But then, you know, again, this is recognized as, you know, even if that's the case, this is really recognized as a problem within the Star Wars universe, that there needs to be, you know, it's a plot device that you work against. So David Brin's like, again, he's kind of right, but he's completely missing the fact that the story knows this, and that's part of the story is to say that it's a bad thing, because his overall gist is that Star Wars effectively, and you can read more, I'll put a link in the show notes for this, is that Star Wars effectively gives you this message that, you know, we need kings and queens. We need to be, you know, ruled over by such and such groups and all this stuff. Where I would argue, actually, the entire purpose of Star Wars is to say quite the opposite. That you don't need to be ruled by all of this. That you know, I mean, in Star Wars, really, as Stephanie will often bring up, and I think she's right on, you know, doesn't even really have messages. It's just a good fucking time. And for the average person, that's exactly what it is. Now, when you get into the comic books, when you get into the novels, when you get into some other aspects of it, that's when Star Wars starts to take a moral shape. But it is plainly obvious that David Brin here has never done that. I mean, he just fucking hasn't. So I was really, and I'm out of time now, but I read that and I thought that was so crazy. The other point I want to bring up quick, because I told people I would, is that there was an article going around, and this article is also in the show notes, where there was a very real concern over the alt-right were mad about Rogue One. And I even saw people who loosely or not so loosely exist within, shall we say, my philosophical or social circle, who said that they are boycotting Rogue One because they felt like it is an anti-white film. Like that's really what they thought, because apparently a couple of a producer and a writer of the movie made comments like, you know, that this is that the movie Rogue One, that Star Wars is about a multicultural, you know, resistance group, a multicultural, multiracial resistance group going against a white nationalist system. And so these people who are supposedly liberty lovers or anarchists or something, or also, you know, in the grander scope that was brought up in the article, that being people of the alt-right, are like, well, we're going to boycott this thing. We're done. In fact, they had a hashtag dump Star Wars. Folks, if you really, like, if you are only going to watch things from a point of philosophical purity, throw away your television. Never go to theaters again. Do not play a single video game, except for maybe Zomi Offline Games, because it's an anarchist game company. It's mine. Just don't do it. If you can't separate the art from the artist, you're in for a very boring life. I mean, you really are. Like, I'm in awe at the reaction to this. Now, I mean, the alt-right, whatever, they get pissed off at anything where, in my opinion, it seems, where, or at least a lot of the alt-right gets pissed off, you know, anytime, say, like a woman's in charge, or that the woman's a hero or something like that, which that boggles my mind. Why the fuck not? You know, what's wrong with that? But yeah, I mean, this is really it. They cannot, and they think, just like David Brin was thinking, oh, Star Wars is this propaganda to get people to think that they need to, take on leaders and that they need to do this and that it's against democracy, blah, blah, blah. And it's just, no, really take the fucking story for what it is. Ironically, most of the propaganda out there that's in the realm of media and entertainment comes in the form of documentaries, not in these films. I mean, I agree. Look, it sucks. There really isn't much in the way of entertainment out there that is, say, especially if you're an anarchist, say nothing of what David Brin is, if you're, slightly libertarian, that there's really no media out there for you, to apply kind of your principles to and to see your principles sort of come to life. I agree. That sucks. Okay. But that doesn't mean that we just suddenly write off everything else. I mean, it just it feels like it goes to whole other levels of I hate to say this, but of hate, to where you just, you refuse to accept, look, if it's not pure, I'm not dealing with it. And wow, that's a loss. It's like Star Trek. Oh, Star Trek shows off socialism. So? Is it a good show? Is it enjoyable? Did you have a good time? Yeah. Okay. And look, if people can't separate, and this is the other thing too, is because then people will make the argument that, well, these people can't separate reality from fiction. Okay, then where's the problem? The fiction or the person that can't separate reality from fiction? Obviously the problem's with the person, not with the goddamn movie. Drives me nuts. So anyway, and this is, really, it speaks to an overall, it's all marketing. David Brin is getting marketing. These alt-right fucks are getting marketing. It's all, they latch on to something that's popular and they critique it, whether they actually believe that or not, because some of them I don't think they really do. Okay. Whether they believe this shit or not. And they do it just to get some, kind of spotlight on whatever's going on. I guess, Carl Jung was right. What you resist persists. And yeah, it just drives me nuts. Like, look, if you actually knew anything, if you went beyond, Star Wars is especially with Disney, it's now, look, there's an entire canon now that spreads multimedia. Okay. It's all these different aspects. You can share your opinion, sure, but guess what? Your opinion's not informed if you're not taking, if you're not really kind of taking it. You don't have to like Star Wars. You can hate it. That's okay. All right. But let's be clear. If you're going to make kind of this case, about what it's saying, well, you might want to know your stuff. And David Brin obviously doesn't. I could bring up something that a message that Star Wars, and I brought this up during my Force Awakens review that I did last year. Here's something that they never consider. Okay. What Star Wars really teaches is that the only way to win a fight is to use the dark side. Obi-Wan has to get mad to kill Darth Maul. Luke has to get mad to kill Darth Vader. And there's a bunch of other cases just like that, to where the dark side has to get used to, to effectively end the battle. That's the way you win. That's a message that Star Wars actually puts out there over and over and over again. It's not until some Jedi gets angry that suddenly they can beat the Sith. So, that's a controversial thing to bring up. That's worth bringing up because that's covering a large chunk of, of the Star Wars saga as a whole. But this nonsense that Yoda never said anything brilliant or something, or that it's teaching some kind of demagoguery, give me a break. And then that somehow it's instilling it in people's minds that's what they need. Again, the problem's not Star Wars. If people are taking that in, the problem's with the people. The problem's with the education system or something. So, anyway, boy, I'll tell you something. I'm not going to say how I know this, but we'll end this off on a fun note. But there's some cam jobs out there, cam jobs being where somebody went into a theater, held up a camera and recorded, a movie, say that's in theaters. There's some cam jobs of Rogue One out there that are near perfect. And I am very impressed. So if you still haven't seen the film, there's options. I'm not recommending anybody do that. I'm just saying that there's options out there and that they're not bad. So, but I still think just a dynamite movie. I thought it was really, really good. And again, it's going to be a movie that's going to raise an importance and perhaps enjoyment, years down the line. So very excited about what's happening in Star Wars. A lot of good stuff going down. And of course, our thoughts are with Carrie Fisher. Anyway, that's enough Sovryn Tech for this week. Again, we'll get back to a more structured show next week. We'll have a good time. And thank you all so much. If you want to donate to the show, please consider becoming a Sovryn Tech patron. Just go to sovryntech.com. That's all you got to do. SOVRYN-tech.com takes you right to the Patreon page. At least $1 a month. If you want to do more, Satan bless you. That's awesome. Okay. But just $1 a month and you get access to hundreds of hours of just tons and tons of content out there. So please do that. Of course, there's also the wish list, wishlist.zog.ninja. And oh man, I didn't even get to tell you about Saturnalia and Calendar. Well, whatever. Happy Saturnalia, happy Calendar. Woo! I'll see you on the other side.
You just experienced Sovryn Tech. Go to sovryntech.com, that's SOVRYN-tech.com, and connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.